Okay. All right, guys. Welcome to UD Town Hall Series Episode 2 with Gwinnett District Attorney Danny Porter. I firstly want to extend thanks on behalf of the entire UD board for everyone's attendance at our first episode with State Court Judge-elect Veronica Cope. We really appreciate the support and we hope you keep giving it to us. We will put this event on with the DA Danny Porter, and this will be great as well. In other news, we just wanted to, as a UD board, come out and extend our remorse to the passing of Congressman John Lewis, the civil rights icon, who was very influential in the civil rights movement, especially the March on Washington, and one of the only civil rights leaders to actually get into the government. He was very influential in the U.S. House of Representatives, and his impact will be felt, or the impact of his loss will be felt worldwide. He was very influential, not only in Georgia, but influential in the entire country. And we just want to extend our gratitude to him for his service, to his many years of service. We miss you. We will miss you, Congressman Lewis, and we hope that you enjoyed in paradise. And now, without further ado, we will get into UD Town Hall Series Episode 2. I'll firstly introduce ourselves. My name is Jalen Pettis. I'm the Vice President of Unity Diversity.
My name is Akil Taraga. I'm the president of Unity Diversity.
My name is Lokesh Joshi. I'm the co-founder and senior member of Unity and Diversity.
And we have our esteemed guest, Gwinnett District Attorney Danny Porter. All right, guys, it is time to get into questions. Is everybody ready? All right.
Well, I'm ready. Go ahead.
Great. Yeah. Akil, you will start us off.
Yes, sir. So, being a district attorney, what are the duties?
Fundamental duty of the district attorney's office is set out in state law, and it says that we are to attend to the superior court and represent the state in all matters in which the state has an interest. Basically, what that means is that I'm a prosecutor for felony crimes that appear before court. I present the state's evidence to juries or to judges in order to prove that a person has committed a crime beyond a reasonable doubt. But also throughout Georgia law, there are approximately 100 statutory duties that are set out for the district attorney, and they range from impaneling grand juries and being the legal advisor to a grand jury to auditing forfeiture funds for local law enforcement agencies. At one point, the district attorney kind of seems to be the catch-all. Oh, let's let the district attorney do it. But at one point, district attorneys could even be appointed by the court to represent parties in divorce cases. Thank goodness that law has been repealed because I don't know anything about divorce law, and so I can focus on what I do for what I do.
Good. All right. Can you just give us an insight into your experience? I guess take us back to the beginning.
Sure. I started in 1981 as an assistant district attorney. Wow. And you've got to understand, in 1981, Gwinnett County had 103,000 people that lived in the county. Jimmy Carter Boulevard was a 2-lane road, and it wasn't named Jimmy Carter Boulevard. All along Brook Hollow Parkway was just open fields. All along 316 were just open fields. It was a rural evolving into a suburban county, and we had an entirely different court system. We had an entirely different way of handling cases. There were fewer options that were available to handle defendants in terms of treatment, in terms of diversion. Those didn't really exist. And since 1981, up until 1992, I was an assistant district attorney. I was a line assistant district attorney and then a supervisor. In 1992, I ran for district attorney, and I was elected then in a contested race. And since then, I've been elected every 4 years. And this is what I anticipate will be my last term. At the end of this term, I'll be about 70 years old. And the job of district attorney takes a tremendous commitment of time and effort. And I don't want to do the job halfway. I want to do the job at the best of my abilities. And I'm not sure that I can live up to my own standards as I get older. So that's basically our history. And during that time that I've been district attorney, there's been an evolution of the entire county, both in diversity and in population. And that brings along with it a diversity in crime. We have to recognize different types of crime. And also it's been a challenge to develop programs that take certain types of offenders and divert them out of the system. Because you got to remember, the goal of a criminal justice system is to basically put people in a position where we won't see them again, where they no longer either commit crimes or are able to commit crimes. And that involves either punishment, which means incarceration, or it more often deals with, most of the people that I deal with are not evil. They're not bad. They've just made a huge mistake. And if we can show them that mistake and fix that mistake, they can go on to be productive citizens. And that's really should be the goal of the criminal justice system.
Beautiful.
I'm ready for question 2.
Yeah, that's all Lokesh.
All right.
He is working right now, so he's working on the link. So I'll go ahead and keep things moving. So, you mentioned a great thing about change. The county is changing, the demographics are changing, some opinions are changing. And a lot of people, especially the youth, are calling for more change. They want things to be new. They want new things. They want things that reflect the new demographic in the county. So we know that you've been district attorney since 1992, as you stated, which is impressive, I might add. So with new people wanting more change, why should the citizens of Gwinnett County still vote for you?
I think first of all, you have to look at my record of change that's gone on since 1992. You've got to remember, in 1992, basically the options that were available for the disposition of a criminal case were you either sent someone to prison or you put them on probation. And that was basically all we had. Over the years, we have one of the oldest accountability courts in the entire state. We've run that at full capacity for over 15 years. Those are accountability courts, are treatment courts. That means someone who commits a crime because of their drug addiction or because of their mental health problems, or because the newest type is a veterans court. We're recognizing that veterans come back from combat zones, they suffer from PTSD, and oftentimes that leads them into criminal behavior because they have a hard time adjusting to the workforce and their families. So veterans court is kind of a catch-all. We try and treat the whole person. We help them with their homelessness. We help them with their jobs. We help them with their addictions. And that's the newest type of accountability court. So since 1992, it's been a continuous evolution of taking good ideas and pushing them forward as a way of handling people who commit crimes and who are found guilty of crimes. And so as we move forward from 2020, there are going to be new evolutions. One of the evolutions that I've been looking at is the handling of youthful offenders. In Georgia, certain types of youthful offenders can be charged as adults, and those are for serious violent felonies. Well, not all of those folks need to be treated as adults. They don't need to have mandatory sentences. And so I've started a program where each one of those cases is reviewed by a non-traditional investigator who looks only at the defendant, and then can we solve that defendant's problem with alternate dispositions of the cases. But the thing you've got to look at is those are really serious cases. Those are armed robbery and rape and murder. And so you have to have a balance based on experience of how you're going to handle those cases. You can't just say no juvenile should be treated as an adult, because sometimes a juvenile has been all the way through the juvenile system and they're still committing criminal acts. So it's a balance that I think only comes from experience. And so I think people should vote for me because number one, I know all of the statutory duties. I perform those statutory duties. And number two, I have a record of innovation that adapts to the population as it grows, and I'll continue to do that.
Yeah, and that was great. So setting the premise as charging individuals.
Mm-hmm.
As a district attorney, what would be your policy in charging under the 3-strike rule? Do you take into consideration any of the triggering offenses and proportionality of possible punishment upon conviction? So for example, if I myself committed 3 major crimes, the 4th one being minor, would I still get maximum punishment?
The 3-strike rule that you're talking about never existed in Georgia. We had what was called a 2-strike rule.
Oh, okay.
That has since been abolished by a repeal of that statute. What we have now is what's called recidivist treatment. In other words, we can bring before the jury or bring before the judge a defendant's prior record of similar crimes, and then the judge has to give a sentence within the sentence range of the statute. So the answer to your question, the short answer is no, you wouldn't get a maximum sentence. And number two is, yes, we would consider the current offense before we would bring the recidivist treatment into play. It's not an automatic. It's not automatic. It's a discretionary call, and it would depend on the nature of the current crime. It would depend on the prior record. So in every case, you have to seek justice in the individual case. I'm not a big believer in pigeonholing all burglars or pigeonholing all armed robbers, or that's not how, in my mind, that's not how our system should work.
I just wanted to backtrack a little bit. When I believe it was a previous question about why we should vote for you. You mentioned something about mental health. I believe it was within the Veterans Court and something before that. I can't remember exactly what it was. But my question is, as district attorney, have you or will you advocate for increased funding for mental health and substance abuse assistance for persons subject to arrest or incarceration in the Gwinnett County Jail?
Absolutely. The jail right now has a couple of great programs that they've started up. One's called GRIP, which is a reentry program for misdemeanor offenders and for people who are being held in jail before their disposition. They also have a program called the Barracks, which is for veterans. Those are the kinds of programs that we have to move forward on people who commit crimes because of their addictions or because of their mental health problems. The biggest problem in mental health is that when a person goes into the court system and they're, say, a paranoid schizophrenic, no matter what you do, when they come out, they're still going to be a paranoid schizophrenic. So and the one thing that we found about people who suffer from mental health is they oftentimes won't voluntarily comply with their medication and their treatment. So there has to be some leverage on them. And that's what the mental health court does. It keeps them on a schedule. It keeps them reporting. It keeps them on their medication schedule so that we can instill the habit of, look, you can live a productive life if you'll just take your meds and do your treatment. And we've had pretty good success with it.
So,
but there's no question that we need to in Georgia as a whole, and in Gwinnett County specifically, there's a very limited number of facilities that will treat criminal defendants, and there's a definite need for that. And that sort of is, when we talk about police reform, I think that's one of the things we need to address when you talk about police reform.
Well, since you mentioned police reform, I guess why don't we jump into that? Do you have a comprehensive plan as to what you would suggest for police reforms?
Well, the biggest problem that the Gwinnett County Police in general have suffered since 2007 or 2008 is that they've never been able to maintain their staffing levels, because there's been an expansion of the need, as demonstrated by the opening of the most recent precinct down in the Grayson area. And you got to understand, the Gwinnett County Police receive about 500,000 calls for service every year. That means 500,000 people dial 911 and say, I need a policeman. So what I'm going to advocate for, and what I do advocate for, is there has to be some kind of a way to separate those calls that actually need a policeman and some that need a mental health professional. But you've got to understand, let's say you have a person who's on the Jimmy Carter Bridge and they're threatening to jump off. That's not a 911 call that needs a policeman. You need a trained mental health provider there. But in the end, you're going to still have to have a policeman in case that gets violent, in case that goes bad. So it's not enough just to send a mental health professional. We have to do that in addition to fundamental police work.
So, and just a specific question, what would you define as like mentally ill, and to what extent does rehabilitation factor into your sentencing recommendations?
Well, there's several ways to define mentally ill. What we really look at are the DSM-4, which is the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual, which is the baseline for psychologists and psychiatrists. It defines mental illness, and it can be anything from a personality disorder all the way up to a psychosis, like paranoid schizophrenia. But you could have personality disorders, for instance, like impulse control, right, is defined. So in the courts, we use those legal definitions from the DSM-5 to determine the mental health. Now, that is what guides us in putting people into treatment, putting people into the rehabilitative courts, whether it's, drug addiction, for instance, is classified as a personality disorder. So that is a treatment. That's a treatment case.
Thank you.
All right, so Mr. Porter, with you bringing in like police reform and talking about we need also mental health crisis center, do you feel like politics plays a role in this? Do you feel like Democrats are more supportive of this than Republicans, or vice versa? Do you feel like in our judiciary system and in the law enforcement that the game of the D and the R is, come into effect? Do you really feel like if you're a D, you're more supportive of certain things than others, and if you're an R, you're more supportive of another thing than say the Democrats are? Do you believe that politics should be involved in law enforcement and judiciary system? And if not, why not? And if you do think it should, why so?
Well, you've asked me two questions here. First is it involved? Yeah, is politics involved? And the answer to that is yes. You tend to see more Republican lawmakers who are in favor of punitive treatments. But on the other hand, some of the biggest criminal justice reform that's ever happened in the state happened under a Republican governor. That was Nathan Deal.
Absolutely.
I worked on that committee, and the whole idea was to move away from a punitive aspect.
Absolutely.
Now, in my job as the prosecutor, politics should not, and in fact cannot, play a role in the decision to prosecute. I was faced with that in 1994 when there was a report that the treasurer of the Republican Party had stolen $10,000 from the local party, and it didn't even faze me. It was a crime. I prosecuted it, and so
So,
in my
Mr.
job,
Porter,
I don't think
if
it should.
if you believe your job shouldn't involve political parties, why do district attorneys, why do they run either under a D or an R? You specifically, I know this year you were a little debatable whether you were going to run under a D or an R. Why do you feel like why do DAs run under a political party? I mean, you personally, you could be running under an independent if you'd like. So why is it that you tend to run either under a D or an R then? Why not an independent?
Because the law requires it.
The law requires.
There are certain positions under the law that are called nonpartisan.
Okay.
Those are judges. There are certain other, basically judges.
Absolutely.
But sheriffs.
In terms of like a DA, are you guys allowed to run as independents?
Yes, but under Georgia law, it's very difficult to run as an independent. You have to collect a certain percentage of signatures from a certain percentage of the voters. It's around 10%. So in Gwinnett County, I would have had to collect 100,000 signatures to even qualify as an independent. So
it's easier to run with. So you being associated with the Republican Party, do you believe that your decisions will be more conservative rather than liberal, or along any of those lines, right? I mean, obviously people might think that, and we have had some community questions come in asking if your decisions, right, up till now in your 20 plus years of service to Gwinnett County, so far your decisions have always been unbiased, right? Do you plan on going along with that? Will that D or that R really affect it?
no.
No.
I mean, I've been doing this the same way. I've been doing this the same way for 30 years. I think it's been successful. I think my office is respected, and it's people understand that it's not biased one way or the other, that we make a decision based on the facts of the case. Why would I change that now? That's not in my head. It's not the way I work. And I'm going to continue in the same vein that I always have, is that people who commit crimes are defendants. People who don't commit crimes are not guilty. They're innocent. And
absolutely.
It doesn't matter to me what their political affiliation is.
So backtracking to you, you saying as an independent, you have to collect around tentatively about 100,000 signatures from Gwinnett County residents. If you were to run as an independent, do you believe Gwinnett County citizens would give you the 100,000 plus signatures that's required?
I think they would have. I think they would have. I feel confident that they would have, but the logistics of actually doing that would be very difficult. And then you've got to understand from a political standpoint, I would have drawn opposition from both the Democrats and the Republicans. So
absolutely.
Tactically, running as an independent might not have been the best move, but so I had to dance with the one who brought me. So.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Sure.
I wanted to just ask a question that we got from the community. It is referencing, let's see, or asking, would you support any measures to make our courts more accessible to non-English speaking victims, defendants, and witnesses?
Well, we already do that.
Okay.
The courts, first of all, you've got to understand that in the criminal courts, at least, about 96% of the defendants who are arrested have appointed lawyers. The courts also spend close to $1 million a year on translators. So those translators are available in almost any language. Of course, the most common are Spanish and Korean. almost any language, we have translators available both for the work that they do with lawyers and the times that they're in court. Probably where the shortcoming is I'm not sure about the availability of translators in the civil courts, in the divorces and the contracts. If there was an area where we needed to work, that would be it. But in the criminal cases, translators are available almost from the moment of arrest all the way through the court system. Now, as far as transparency, you've got to remember Georgia law provides that the courts of this country are open to citizens who want to come and watch court. We cannot bar anyone literally from being in the courtroom. And now with the COVID and everything else, we've had to adapt that, but typically courts are available to anybody who wants to come up and see them.
Mr. Porter, do you think that there are issues of racial discrimination and bias in the prosecution of criminal cases in Georgia? If so, describe the problem. And what would you do as district attorney to combat them?
I can't answer the question as to Georgia. I would say certainly there's a perception of it, but I can say in my office, the case management system that I use allows me to track the demographics of all defendants and all dispositions of all cases. And I've made that available to different groups over the last year. As a matter of fact, last week, I ran a demographic report that shows that the disparity between Black defendants and white defendants in my courts is about 3%, which of the number comes to about, over 3 years, about 300 cases.
Okay.
So let me ask this one. This is another community question. Are there any criminal offenses that you believe should be decriminalized?
I think that the marijuana possession statute should be changed to increase the amount that we call personal use. I think that marijuana should be reclassified from a Schedule I controlled substance to at least a 2, so there can be medical research legitimately done on marijuana and its benefits to people with seizure disorders or chronic pain or that type of thing. I think that we have a lot of criminal statutes that probably have addressed very small interests. For instance, it's a felony in Georgia to gather pine straw on someone else's land without their permission. I mean, that may be a big law in South Georgia. I don't know, but it certainly doesn't have any application in Gwinnett County. So we tend to, the legislature tends to look at a problem and say, oh, let's make it a crime. And I think we have to have a better process before we make something criminal behavior.
Mr. Porter, so actually this just came in from Mr. Joyner. What are your concerns about systemic racism in Gwinnett County and your impact and the impact on your role as DA? Obviously, you know, certain crimes, like you just brought up marijuana, there tend to be certain ethnicities that are caught up in it more than other ethnicities. So do you feel like this has to do with systemic racism in our society? Or what are your thoughts on it, and what do you believe your office is doing in order to tackle that systemic racism if it's present?
I think the first thing you have to do is objectively look at the actual numbers rather than, and that I do that consciously. I keep track of that so that's the first thing you can do. And the other thing, and one of the things my office is doing actively, is you increase the diversity of your office so that you get a different viewpoint. You know, all prosecutors should respect the law and enforce the law, but everybody's going to approach it in a different way. And I think that over the last few years, we started out with hiring Hispanic investigators, hiring Hispanic attorneys. We've hired Korean investigators and Korean attorneys, and now we're moving into increasing the African American population within the office. And I do find that there are different views from each culture, that there are different views of how we should proceed with certain types of cases.
Thank you.
So here's another question. This is another community one. I'm just kind of going to go down the line in terms of the community questions. The first question is, do you support the death penalty?
In appropriate cases, I believe the death penalty is an appropriate punishment. And I go back to when you've seen some of the things that I've seen, because our office sends lawyers to every homicide scene in Gwinnett County. We send investigators and lawyers because we believe that's the best way to assist the police in making better cases, following the law, respecting people's constitutional rights. So we've been out on scenes, and when you see a case where a woman starves an 8-year-old little girl to death, and then puts her body in a garbage can and sets it on fire, it's pretty hard not to think about the death penalty as an appropriate punishment. So in the appropriate case, now I don't seek the death penalty for every case that qualifies. I use discretion in deciding which one, and over the last 30 years, I've sought the death penalty 12 or 13 times.
So what criteria do you use when you determine that the death penalty is applicable?
Well, the first thing you have to do is you have to be able to prove the crime beyond a reasonable doubt. And basically the death penalty only applies to murder cases. So you have to look at the case you have, and can you prove that? Although the legal standard is beyond a reasonable doubt, you almost have to be 100% certain that you have the right person.
Exactly, because
juries will not give the death penalty where there's any what's called residual doubt. Then the other thing you do is you look at the background of the defendant. What's their prior record look like? And then you even expand beyond the traditional things that you look at, and you look at their family. You look at what happened to them growing up. I can remember a case where there was a lot of pressure to seek the death penalty. The defendant's name was Kenny Hardwick. And as I began to learn more about his childhood, what happened was he killed his baby girl. She was 18 months old, and then he hit her body, then he buried her right there where 85 and 316 come together. There's a big swamp back there, and that's where he buried her. And then made a false outcry that she had been kidnapped. And once we found out that he had done it, I really looked at his background. And one of the things that I'll always remember is that at one point, Kenny Hardwick was in a juvenile detention facility. And when they went to release him, his family had moved and left no forwarding address. So he had to stay in detention another 6 months till they found the family and reunited him with his family. And I thought, the family moved so he couldn't get back to him. And I said, what kind of screwed up childhood is that? And I think that was part of what led him to the crime he had. He just got overwhelmed by being a father and taking care of a baby and all those things. So you make a judgment based on the defendant. You make a judgment based on the crime and the defendant.
So I guess going off of, that's actually a perfect example of the question that I'm about to ask. It sounds like in that case, he really did not have, there were really no rehabilitatory efforts being made to reach out to him to try and make sure that he could reacclimate into society after being locked away for however long. So what, if any, rehabilitative efforts is the Gwinnett County DA's office taking to help criminals who have gotten out of jail reintegrate back into society?
Well, other than we have supported and encouraged the Department of Corrections to bring those programs into Gwinnett County. And the programs really fall into two categories. One is the Department of Corrections, which runs the prison system, has instituted what they call a reentry program. And inmates who are about to parole out spend a year or 2 years in that reentry program if they can qualify. And that reentry program, and then when they parole out, most of them move to what's called a day reporting center. The day reporting center is where they get their GED if they don't have it. They learn job skills. They learn literally society skills, how to balance a checkbook, how to dress for an interview, how to prepare a resume. And the way the day reporting center works is they start out literally, they're there all day, just like a job. Because you want to get them used to a job. You want to get them used to it. And then as the program goes on, it usually takes about a year and a half. As it goes on, they're gradually allowed more and more freedom based on goals that they achieve. And so we've encouraged the Department of Correction to bring those programs to Gwinnett so we can run inmates through that before we let them loose on society.
So speaking of crime, are you concerned about the criminalization of poverty? And if so, what policies will you put into place to avoid fees and costs for poor people who are like arrested, deferred into a program, or detained in the Gwinnett County Jail?
I think when you talk about the criminalization of crime, what you're really talking about is not that they're facing criminal sanctions. It's that they're arrested and detained, and then they lose whatever job they have, they lose whatever house they have, they lose whatever they have. Most of that is really handled by another office. It's handled by the solicitor's office in regard to misdemeanor crimes. And in the last couple of years, since the new solicitor has been elected, I haven't seen any bail reform there. I've seen now in my court with felonies, those bonds are set by judges. They're set at the time the warrant is issued, or they're set after a hearing in the Superior Court. So there's a lot less room for bail reform. I think in terms of decriminalization of poverty, you have to focus mostly on the theft crimes. You have to focus, because that seems to be where it's focused. And those folks need to be moved into diversion programs rather than taking up space at the county correctional institute or at the jail. There's no sense in holding folks in jail when they'll appear most of the time. The counties that have instituted release programs show that there's really not a huge difference between the people who are allowed out under a program and the people who post bond as to whether they return to court. So, but that's really, the focus on that needs to be in the misdemeanor courts, not in the superior courts.
So are there any shortcomings in law enforcement in Gwinnett that you can identify?
I have to say that Gwinnett County, both on the city level and on the county police level, requires a higher level of training than the state requires. So all of our officers have more mandated training than is required by state law. So in Gwinnett, we have some of the best trained police officers in the state. I think we're going to have to evolve police work, and some of that has to do with staffing. Some of it has to do with programs. I've always been a firm believer in community policing, that we need to get police officers out into the community to build trust, to show people that that police aren't the enemy. We have to show that we have to show police that citizens aren't the enemy. And so I think if there was a shortcoming right now, is that when the manpower problem happened, they had to give up a lot of their community outreach programs just to answer the calls. And I think we need to go back to that community policing.
And that could be a possible solution for the sentiments that are on defund the police, that will want to allocate some of the police funds to more community oriented programs. I guess, would you support anything like reallocating some funds to community outreach programs or anything like that? Or what's your opinion on that?
I think rather than defund, you just got to refund. You gotta allocate your funds that traditionally go to police. I'm not sure you're going to be able to decrease that, but you need to allocate more funds that may be going somewhere else to those adjunct services to police to allow them to do their job. One of the big problems I think we have in the United States is we ask police officers to do a lot of things that they're really not trained or capable of doing. I mean, I talked about 500,000 calls for service. I've been with a police officer when he had to respond to a service, when a call for service went into 911, that a 17-year-old wouldn't go to bed when his parents wanted him to. And they wanted a police officer there. And the ironic thing is the next morning, that same 17-year-old wouldn't get up out of his bed to go to school. And they wanted a police officer to come and solve their family problem. And that's the kind of calls that we're getting. And police are not equipped to do that and shouldn't have to.
So what type of programs could remedy the issues that police officers are not trained to do, that they shouldn't really be handling? What type of programs, if you could think of any, would you suggest for that?
I think it really depends on the call. It really depends on what the police are out there doing. And I think we need to have, so at the very beginning, when the call comes in, we have to have the ability to route that 911 call, say to a mental health provider or to medical personnel, to ambulance personnel, to police, that we need to be able to allocate the calls. But that requires that you have those agencies in place ready to respond to the calls, which we don't have. And that's really where I see that we need to be approaching it, is supplemental agencies to police agencies that can handle calls that police officers really don't need to handle.
Absolutely. And Mr. Porter, leading into that, Gwinnett County and just the state of Georgia in general have been seeing an uprise in drug trafficking, opioid overdoses, and all of that. As a district attorney, obviously your office would be more in charge of prosecuting those cases rather than any other office. How do you plan on working with the police department, with the sheriff's department, with the GBI, and all other law enforcement offices to basically reduce the amount of prosecutions, to reduce the amount of cases from the beginning all the way through the court system? How would your office work hand to hand with our law enforcement agencies to ensure that these cases would come down?
Well, I think the most important thing you can do, and what we do, is that we don't focus on the users. Okay. We don't focus on the end criminal. I mean, it is a crime to possess cocaine. It is a crime to possess methamphetamine. And so we don't focus on the users in terms of criminal prosecution. What we do is we use technology, and by that I mean mostly wiretaps and electronic surveillance, to work our way up the pyramid and get the people at higher up, the distributors, the importers, the smugglers. You got to remember, nobody sells drugs for philosophical reasons. Nobody's pumping opioids into our school system because they think it's a good thing. They're doing it for money. And what I do is I focus on the people who are doing it for money, not because they're addicts, but because they're doing it for the money.
So
The other thing that we're doing is we're treating all fentanyl overdose cases as homicides. And we're prosecuting people who knowingly sell fentanyl-laced drugs that kill people. We're prosecuting them for murder.
okay, so do you think you prosecuting them for murder is that bringing a change to our county's opioid cases? Is that bringing a change and a negative decrease to the number of cases you're seeing in your office, and of course with your law enforcement partners?
A lot of them don't like to come to Gwinnett County. And we know that because I've heard my name mentioned on wiretaps. We don't want to go up there, Porter's up there. We don't want, so a certain faction of them are afraid of us, which is not a bad thing as far as I'm concerned. But it's hard to tell. Overall in the United States, if we don't do something about demand reduction, and I'm not sure that's a law enforcement problem, but if we don't do something about demand reduction in this country for narcotics, then we'll never stop the drug trade. There aren't enough cops in the world to stop the drug trade if we can't get a handle on demand. And that's going to require something that's outside the law enforcement view, which is more treatment programs, more facilities, more hospitals.
Absolutely.
So, go ahead.
Good.
Okay, so actually, I was gonna move on from this topic. You can go ahead.
Okay.
That's fine. Good.
Okay. So, what are your goals for reducing prison overcrowding?
Well, when I worked on the Criminal Justice Reform Commission for Governor Deal, that was the goal, is to reduce prison overcrowding. And so as a result of that, what we did is we changed some statutes from felonies to misdemeanors. We basically strictly limited the number of mandatory sentences that are available under our law. We did a lot of things to try and reduce, and ironically, the way we sold it to the conservatives was that it would save money, and it has. All of these day reporting centers and prison alternatives have saved a bunch of money. And so I think if you look at the numbers within what we call hard beds, the prison beds, those have been reduced. And right now, the Georgia prison system runs at or below capacity almost constantly. And so I think the criminal justice reform has been successful in that goal.
So, Mr. Porter, leading into the prison reform and reducing the population in prisons, do you think House Bill 213, which was signed by Governor Kemp on, I believe it was May 10th of 2019, which basically legalized the selling of hemp to users and legalized the use of hemp, do you believe that played an effect on our prison populations and helped in bringing down the population of a lot of these marijuana cases that come into the county?
It did, but I don't think they intended it. What actually happened with the hemp bill is that it defined hemp as, well, you got to understand, hemp comes from the same plant that marijuana does. And they defined hemp as having a certain THC level. And then marijuana is defined in the code section as having another THC level. What we have is at the local level, there's no test that can differentiate between marijuana and hemp. Therefore, we can't prosecute the cases. It's not a legal problem, it's a technical problem. And so, yes, I don't think they intended that, but yes, it has reduced the number of cases that are charged, particularly on the misdemeanor level, because you can't tell the difference right now between hemp and marijuana. They tried to fix it in the last legislature, but I'm not sure they did.
Okay, so you do believe that indirectly, if so, but it did bring a difference to our prison systems and how we go about prosecuting?
Probably more to our jail.
Okay.
Remember, a jail is where they hold people for misdemeanor offenses or pre-trial. So it probably had more of an effect on our jail population and our local correctional institute population than it did on the big prison system, the state prison system.
Okay.
So I just wanted to kind of I'm going to go a little bit broad here because we're getting close to time where we're going to have to wrap it up. So has the current climate in the country, I mean, obviously with all of the events that have transpired over the past couple of months that have rocked the country to its very foundations, have any of those events affected your stance on issues?
I think it's better to say that they confirmed it. Let's start with the case in Glenn County, the Ahmaud Arbery case. That was murder, plain and simple. I mean, that there is no reasonable prosecutor could have applied the citizen's arrest doctrine to that case and found it to be a justified killing. There's no rational way for me to get my head around that. But it only confirms that you have to look at each case and you have to apply the law fairly and regardless of race. And then when you look at the George Floyd case, you look at a police department that used techniques and restraint techniques that Gwinnett County has been, we haven't used those for 10 years. We don't allow chokeholds. We don't allow kneeling on people's neck. We don't allow that type of thing. And it just amazed me that there are departments that still do that. And it makes me proud of our law enforcement that we're further along than that. So I think it's better to say it confirmed my beliefs rather than change my beliefs.
So leading into that, obviously, City of Atlanta just now, you saw what happened with Mr. Rayshard Brooks. The DA, Mr. Paul Howard, he went ahead and pursued charges before a GBI investigation was the final investigation was announced. Do you believe that if this was your office involved instead of another DA's office, it could have been any DA's office, do you believe you would have waited for a final verdict from the GBI before going ahead with any charges?
Well, you got to the GBI does not render a verdict. When they investigate a case, they offer no opinion as to whether it was a justified shooting or not. They present the prosecutor with the facts.
Okay.
There's two things about the Atlanta case that stand out to me. Number one, it's clear to me that Mr. Howard is doing that for political reasons.
Absolutely, that's
absolutely clear to me, and that's improper for a prosecutor to do. The second thing is that the press conference that he held is a violation of the bar rules, and he should lose his bar license for it.
Ooh.
So that's the two things that stand out to me. But to answer your question is, I would have waited till the investigation was complete.
Absolutely.
That's how I've handled them for 30 years. That's how I'll continue to handle them. In any case where there's a claim of justification, you have to get the full investigation.
Exactly.
Whether it's a homeowner that shoots a burglar or whether it's a police officer that shoots a citizen, you have to get all the information before.
Well, let me ask this question. I guess the city of Atlanta, the entire state, really the entire nation is looking at this case, and there are obviously varying opinions on this. And we have you as a very great source here. I know this is going to be kind of a quick judgment, but what do you believe that if it was happening in Gwinnett County, what would you have charged those officers with?
I can't, like I just said, I don't think from the news clips I've seen and from the statements in the press, I think it would be irresponsible for me to even think about charging because I don't have all the information. I don't know what even Mr. Howard knows. So I don't think I can answer that question. I don't think I can tell you what I would have charged.
So Mr. Porter, obviously stemming off of this, has your office ever been caught? I mean, obviously there's always those contradicting statements that happen. Do you believe contradicting statements can be applied here, such as, let's say a taser can be used as lethal, can be considered a lethal weapon on one case, but it can be considered a lethal weapon on another case. You might know where I'm going. to it with this, but do you believe that that is a valid statement when coming to pursuing charges for personal gain, for public gain? That, obviously we can't speak upon that, but do you believe being contradicting is reasonable in some cases? Do you believe saying, oh yeah, that was lethal force there, but same thing happens in another case and it's, oh, it wasn't lethal, it was perfectly safe. Do you believe those types of cases, do you believe that's right? Do you believe that's moral?
I'll reserve judgment on the morality of it, but it's an awful hard logical position to hold, to give those contradicting statements. Now, using certain things, you can argue whether something is a deadly weapon or not, a stick but there are certain things that are classified under the law and under the case law that are what we call per se deadly weapons.
Okay.
And generally a gun is considered to be a per se deadly weapon. A
Absolutely.
knife is considered to be a deadly weapon. Tasers generally fall into the category of non-lethal force, according to the case law. So in that case, I think he has a logical contradiction that can't be supported.
Okay, yeah, that was a question that we actually received a lot was, let's say all of those events that went down in Atlanta and unfolded with the Fulton County DA's office, if that were to happen with Gwinnett County, how would it have been handled different? Now, obviously, going off of what you see in the news and what people say, you can, base a judgment off of that and base charges off of that.
Exactly.
But it was a heated question, actually. Even just now, I was receiving text messages. Hey, Mr. Porter seems, like a very moral district attorney. How would he have handled it different? Now, I'm sure a lot of people have gotten their answers, but
how would I have handled the Brooks case differently?
How would you have handled the Brooks? And then a few weeks prior, obviously, 6 officers of the Atlanta Police Department were also charged with tasering 2 Atlanta college students. And so, how would your office have pursued those charges against the officers differently than Mr. Howard's office did?
Well, the first thing you got to realize is that in most of these cases where there's a claim of justified use for force, there's no public safety reason for an immediate arrest. In other words, the person who thinks they acted lawfully, it doesn't require that you arrest them immediately. So in both cases, I would have held off arrests until the investigation of those cases was complete. And again, I can't answer how I would have handled the case because I don't know all the evidence. For instance, in the case with the 6 officers, I don't know what efforts were made to stop that car. I don't have any idea. So I don't know what made them think they could use force.
All right,
like in the Rayshard Brooks case, they used deadly force, but I don't know what happened up until that. So.
Okay, well, actually, stepping off of that, in our own county, I believe it was in 2016, 2 officers were accused of forcefully grabbing somebody out of their vehicle and pinning them to the floor, causing bodily damage. I believe it was your office that was involved in the prosecution of that case.
What?
Do you believe all the charges that were pursued in that case, they were justified? Do you believe that you were justified in how the officers were dealt with judicially? Or do you believe you could have done something different? Looking back at the events that have just unfolded in the past few months, if you could go back into 2016, would anything have changed? And I think he is frozen at the moment.
Great.
Hopefully he is right back.
Yes, guys, just give us 1 second on that.
Give us a few seconds.
Technical difficulty.
Okay. We only have 3 minutes left, so
That's fine.
Yeah, I guess that is fine. I think we have about 2 questions left.
We do, yeah.
If the connection can come back, that is. Ooh.
Oh, okay. I'm sure he will.
Yeah,
we'll probably rejoin. Yeah.
guys, forgive us for this technical issue here.
I believe there's a storm coming by. Actually, the internet is a little
So connection might be.
I hope everybody's enjoying this town hall. This was a very much awaited town hall. A lot of people were sending in questions. So we appreciate everybody who's joined us and everybody who is just joining in. Thank you so much for your support and continuous support of the town halls. We would like to add there is another town hall tomorrow evening at 4 p.m. with the Democratic Sheriff candidate, Mr. Kibo Taylor. Going further on Tuesday at 2 p.m. we have Mr. Everton Blair of the District 4 school board member. He will be joining us and talking about what changes are coming into the school board, of course, with new COVID restrictions, new COVID guidelines, what new is going to happen, and how is he dealing with everything else. And then in the coming week on Saturday, we have Chief Deputy Lou Solis joining us with the Gwinnett County Sheriff's Office at 5 p.m. Eastern Time, joining us for another town hall session. He is also the Republican candidate for the sheriff's position.
So guys, make sure you definitely get your questions in. I know that you have them. If your parents have questions, tell them to feel free to ask. We are here as a voice for you all, and we are here so that the community truly knows what its elected officials are doing. So that's our job. That is the role that we have taken on. So please make sure to send us in more questions. We would like some more questions if you guys have them.
You guys are sending in a
big shout out to our leadership team, Lauren Johnson, Rich Makani, Joshua Bayham for helping us put this event together. Couldn't have been done without them. Thank you guys for y'all's continued support, and we'll see you tomorrow.
Let's see if Mr. Porter joins us in the next 2-3 minutes.
Again, guys, sorry about that. I guess there's a technical issue on Mr. Porter's end.
And there's a
we only have 1 more minute, I think.
Well, that was not how this needed to end.
That was a very cliffhanger.
I think we may have to just end it like this.
I would hope not. I know we will come back because we still did have a couple more questions.
We did. Let's wait for a few minutes.
We'll wait for a few minutes, guys. Just give us a second.
Viewers,
we're going to get in contact.
Yes.
With Mr. Porter. Some music on in the interim time. Enjoy the sounds of Bossa Nova.
Once again, everybody, we're very apologetic for what's happening. The storm has disturbed some internet connection.
Oops, sorry for that. It would seem as Mr. Porter, they had a lightning strike in the area and he is now offline, which is incredibly unfortunate. Let me see if this is him calling now. Hello.
Hi, Jalen. This is Danny Porter.
Hi.
We just had a lightning strike here.
Gosh, I'm
trying to get back on here.
Okay. Well, we will see how we are going to finish this. What we might have to do, we might have to come back on later on and finish recording. Maybe we only had probably about 2 to 3 questions left. So we might, if everything comes back, we will see about doing that. We'll end the live stream for now. We will probably just edit the video to add the end part on. So yes, so don't worry about that. I think we'll finish the interview.
Okay, this is my cell phone.